Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest.
There was no classified material that was shared in that.
So then if there was no classified material, share it with the committee. You can't have it both ways.
March 27th, 2025, the Houthi PC Small Group Edition. I am David Plotz of CityCast in Washington, D.C., and she's back from the New York Times Magazine and Yale University Law School, Emily Bazelon. We missed you, Emily.
I missed you guys. I missed a lot of news. Some things happened while I was gone. Glad to be back.
Oh my God. Thank God. Also, you can't see this, listeners, but Emily and I are twins. We're both wearing very jolly pink t-shirts this morning.
Spring.
Mine is just because I had took off my workout shirt and this was the only thing at hand. From New York City, where he is struggling with a cold, but not struggling to express the news as co-anchor of CBS Evening News and CBS Evening News Plus, John Dickerson. Hello.
Hello. Hi, everybody. I am struggling in every possible way, actually. But fortunately, I don't have to infect anybody in my office here at home.
John's temperature is 1.8 degrees above normal, just in case you're wondering. We found that out. At least 1.8 degrees.
Actually, it's higher now. That was the overnight reading from my Oura ring. It's now at 101.
Whoa. Giving 101% is John Dickerson. This week on the Gabfest, the jaw-dropping, hilarious if it weren't terrifying fiasco of Signalgate, Houthigate, whatever you want to call it. Then the extraordinarily swift and dangerous and effective Trump attacks on law firms and how that could cripple attempts to rein him in legally. And then the extraordinarily swift and dangerous and effective Trump attacks on higher education. I know those could cripple American science and economic progress. Plus, we will have cocktail chatter. Today's episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. You know that feeling when you're trying to book a trip, too many choices, too much fine print, and no real way to know if you're actually getting the best deal? Smart Travel helps you skip that stress and book with confidence. NerdWallet's travel journalists break down the pros and cons of travel decisions, like when lounge access is worth paying for. So before you book, learn how to get the most out of your travel dollars. Follow Smart Travel on your favorite podcast app, and stay tuned later in the show for a special segment on travel.
Every day, thousands of Comcast engineers and technologists, like Kunle, put people at the heart of everything they create.
In the average household, there are dozens of connected devices. Here in the Comcast family, we're building an integrated in-home Wi-Fi solution for millions of families like my own. It brings people together in meaningful ways.
Kunle and his team are building a Wi-Fi experience that connects 1 billion devices every year. Learn more about how Comcast is redefining the future of connectivity at comcastcorporation.com/Wi-Fi.
This week brought one of the craziest stories of media and government that I can even remember, even by sort of usual Trump-era standards craziness. This one is wild. You're all now familiar with the details, I imagine. Someone at the White House, likely National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, at some point, for some reason, added Atlantic editor Jeffrey Goldberg as a signal contact, and then doubly mysteriously added him to an uber secret group chat, Houthi PC Small Group. PC stands for Principals Committee, my girlfriend told me, to include the Vice President, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, the CIA Director, Stephen Miller, who's also the Vice President, I guess, DNI Tulsi Gabbard, and others, in which they debated plans to bomb Houthi targets in Yemen and debated whether that should be happen. And then Hegseth shared in real time the plans to carry out the attack, all while Goldberg was just sitting on the chat, observing it, and being slightly panicked that he was part of it. Goldberg revealed this all in The Atlantic this week, and then, of course, was naturally smeared by the Trump folks for it. All the originals lied or shaded what was in the chat, saying it was not classified, not war plans. Goldberg then published the whole chat in The Atlantic, revealing the operational details that Hegseth had been sharing with him. But, of course, no one involved in the Trump administration will pay even a small price for this, because that's the world we live in now. So, John, what to you was most shocking about this weird episode?
Hard to figure out what's most shocking. I mean, that the two people who guard America's secrets, the head of the DNI and the CIA, were on this Signal chat. Imagine in your own personal life, we all have to get two-factor authentication to sign into pretty much anything of value. At CBS, I literally can't get in my email if I don't have two-factor authentication. Imagine if people in charge of IT said, you know what, forget it. It's such a hassle, gets in the way. They are the keepers of the secrets and the ones who are supposed to be most fastidious. So there's some interesting just stuff like, I talked to H.R. McMaster, who was the national security advisor for Trump in the first term, his first one. And there's also, I know it's about the secrecy and then this effort to smear Goldberg and claim something different than what's actually in the text. But there's also an interesting policy debate that was taking place really late in the process. His point was, if the president tells you to go, if the president issues an order, which apparently this was, then you shouldn't be having the debate that took place. So this was an interesting window into just how national security things are debated. J.D. Vance basically saying we should wait a month because this is, we're bailing out Europe. So there were some interesting things in it from that perspective too. But the most shocking thing is just the sloppiness with which they handled, very secret of the moment information.
So to me, the fact that there is a private Signal chat that the principals have, I'm sure violates some set of government rules about secrecy. But I cannot get worked up over that. I think it is actually healthy that there be informal lines of communication where the most important policymakers in the country can, in fact, communicate in a way that is in real time. It's quick. And, that you can't always get to a skiff. You can't always get everybody in that group in a room. And this is a way to have quick communications. So I know it's wrong, but that to me is like that's a misdemeanor. The felony is what Hegseth did, which was to share extremely secret, immediate war plans in it with this group without being at all careful about the hygiene.
You're right. I mean, Marco Rubio, when he explained what this thing was, he was like, look, we were all scattered. This was basically a scheduling effort at first. It started as a scheduling effort to make sure we were all kind of informed and people in our office were informed because if this was going to happen fast, Rubio had to call allies. There were people who were going to have to go do work.
This thing was set up for purposes of coordinating how everyone was going to call. When these things happen, I need to call foreign ministers, especially of our close allies. We need to notify members of Congress. Other members of the team have different people they need to notify as well. And that was the purpose of why it was set up. Obviously, someone made a mistake. Someone made a big mistake and added a journalist. Nothing against journalists, but you ain't supposed to be on that thing. So they got on there and this happened.
So if it stayed at that level, probably no big deal. But yeah, it's the Hegseth giving the hour, time, and manner of the attack that's the thing that our correspondent Charlie Daggett at the Pentagon was like, all the people who have to follow these protocols themselves were like, this is crazy. I mean, we would be fired for this, for giving that kind of information out in that way.
That seems right to me. I also am not surprised, but shocked by the amount of lying and smearing of Jeff Goldberg, who we all know, we should say, that's going on. It's just, it's totally expected. I would have been surprised if they had run any other play, but watching it unfold is still horrible. People are lying through their teeth about what happened and then going after Jeff as if he's at fault here.
Yeah, I mean, and Emily, you might want to dig into this, but he behaved with tremendous integrity throughout. He removed himself from the chat when it became clear like this was authentic and they were revealing things that he shouldn't be party to. He did not reveal, except after they lied about it and smeared him and lied, said, oh, this wasn't classified. This wasn't, these weren't war plans. He did not reveal important information. He consulted with his lawyers every turn. He protected the identity of the CIA chief of staff. Because the CIA does not publish the name of who the CIA chief of staff is for legitimate national security reasons. And so he's behaved, I think, with tremendous integrity. And yes, their behavior towards him has been completely unsurprisingly grotesque.
The only way that I can really make sense of this is through the lens of my colleague Jim Rutenberg did an episode of The Daily this week about the Trump administration's approach to the press. And it starts with all the circumventing of the mainstream media that the Trump administration is doing and just pointing out that there's this. We know this, but Jim was super cogent about it. This whole alternate universe of reaching people through podcasts and Fox News and social media on the right. And it just bypasses all the normal truth-telling, fact-checking channels in a way that allows for this alternative reality to spin out. So, you have Sean Hannity saying that this is a smear, and then Trump can come on and say that, the criticism of it is a witch hunt. And that can seem like a plausible way of handling a real breach because a lot of people are not really hearing the unfiltered reality of what happened.
It does seem to have shifted from being a story about security and proper behavior to a story about saying to the public something different than what they can now read with their own eyes. And so the semantic games they're playing with whether this was war plans or not, if you read the text themselves, you see a couple of things. One is that the person on the text chain most anxious to keep leaks from happening was Pete Hegseth. He says at one point when Vance says he wants to delay the operation a month, Hegseth says, well, there are two reasons that's a bad idea. The first is it might leak. That was his number one reason for going ahead with the operation. And then later he said, if we don't go ahead with the operation, I will seek to maintain 100% OPSEC, operation security, meaning none of this will get out. And then when the bombing started and he had announced all of that and given the timelines and the way it was going to be done, he said, and we have maintained 100% OPSEC, which he was literally undermining as he was typing it. So the person who cared the most about leaking was doing the leaking themselves, and yet now is saying that this is all a hoax. So it's an instance in which it's now a story of, what do you believe, me or your lying eyes? Which is, as you point out, Emily, we all have different ways of getting information now. But I do wonder about the effect this has on the rank and file in the military, who all know they would be out on their ass, at least as our reporting tells us, if they did this. And so when you have the boss saying it's no big deal, does that create some separation with the people he is?
Yeah, and there was real risk to the pilots and to the mission here, right? I mean, what if it hadn't been Jeff Goldberg, person of great integrity, who was added, but somebody hostile? That would have been a different set of events unfolding.
I mean, I know the answer to this, but I will ask you, Emily. Why is there literally going to be no consequence to anyone who screwed up here? Michael Waltz, who is the original sinner, apparently, no consequence for him. Pete Hegseth stands tall. He's our tough DOD sec. Any person who did something that's reckless and incompetent in the military would be drummed out, court-martialed. But Hegseth is just as in favor, just as much in the sun of Trump as he was a week ago. Why?
I mean, I think that Trump values loyalty so much that if you screw up and he can stick by you, then you're just going to be more loyal to him. And so that is a credit that, Michael Waltz and I guess Hegseth too has now. And then the other body whose responsibility this is to investigate is Congress. And Congress remains a dog lying down on the floor.
Also, it's we're busy. We got shit to do. We were in the right. It went off fine. The people who care about the security stuff, it's a pain in the ass. And so blah, 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 New York Times editorial, blah, blah, blah. We got shit to do.
Right.
Right. I don't think it's, as we all do. I mean, the reason you have, by the way, these security protocols in anything is because that's when you have a sense of mission, you blow off stuff. And that's why you put security measures in place. That's why I think, and the idea that mistakes are not just the one that are not wholly committed by the proximate cause of them. So in this case, Mike Waltz was obviously the proximate cause. He put Goldberg in the chat, but the whole group was contributory to the mistake by even being on Signal in the first place. The reason you don't go on Signal is it becomes easy to make that kind of mistake. So you build a system where you don't make it easy to make a mistake. You have redundancies in the system, and they all collectively decided not to have redundancies in the system. So it's not just his fault. But I think it's pretty easy to say oh, this is just also because look at who's on the other side making the case that this is bad. It's all the people that the administration already thinks are the enemy anyway.
Can we just mention, though, Hillary Clinton's emails? I mean, these are the people who literally dogged her for years about that mistake. I just have to mention that. Yeah.
Finally, just on the substance, it was very interesting. I mean, J.D. Vance's, I loved having this window into the policy differences and to hear J.D. Vance express his derision for Europe. Vance as those of you who've read about it, didn't want to attack the Houthis because he felt it was just helping Europe, that most of the shipping that goes around the Horn there of Africa, which the Houthis threaten, is shipping that is bound for Europe, or much higher percentage bound for Europe than the U.S., very little for the U.S. And so he's like, why are we bailing the Europeans out? They are, they're pointless people. And the CIA director Ratliff pointed out, actually, well, a lot of the products that are going to Europe ultimately make their way to us, so we are benefiting from this. And then Hegseth is saying, we are the only country in the world that can do this, and we need to send this message. So there's that. And then the second piece of it, which I thought was interesting, is it's kind of showed us who the big dogs were, which is that, like, it looked to me as I was reading it that Stephen Miller kind of gets the last word, Stephen Miller is kind of the person whose approval they're all seeking and who gets to wrap everything up. And Susie Wiles and Tulsi Gabbard seem totally out of it.
You're right. I mean, basically, there's a debate, and Miller says, like, this is what I heard the president say. On the other hand, it's because he is the closest to the president, and the president makes the final call. But that's what was weird to me about where this was in the decision chain. Like, it seemed to be a little unresolved and unclear. And if you're 72 hours away from an operation, presumably it's all already been settled. That's the question there is, what kind of window is this into the decision-making process at the White House? It's also interesting nobody mentioned Iran, which is a perfectly reasonable reason from the Trump administration's point of view to show one of Iran's proxies that, we're not messing around.
I think they did mention Iran. They were talking about the two reasons. They say, the messaging is Biden failed and Iran is this is Iran backed. They do mention it in passing, but it's not
right. I guess when they were talking about the messaging, I guess what I meant was in the context of bailing out Europe. This isn't just about bailing out Europe. It's sending a message to Iran. I just went on the sort of pushback with J.D. Vance. But I mean, obviously the Europeans, who have no illusions about what the administration national security team thinks about them, were obviously verified in their opinions based on behind the scenes conversations.
And I mean, the final point I would make, which is one that history does not tell us the answer yet, is that after the attacks happened, they're all very self-congratulatory, like we've done it. We've hit hard, unlike feckless Biden, who did very weak attacks, and we've done it, and now we've made a difference. I mean, let's just see. Let's see in 3 months if indeed the Houthis have stopped terrorizing shipping in the Horn and have made, are cowed by this display of American power. It would be great if that happened, but I guess I'm less confident maybe than Pete Hegseth was.
My only final point would be the extent to which this is a window into a kind of or a template for a lot of what we see throughout the move fast and break things operation of the Trump administration. I mean, you can see it from all the agencies, from NOAA, which is upended fishing, to Social Security, which is closing offices and causing mayhem and long wait times for people trying to find out about their checks. The casting aside of the normal way of doing things, which is to say, don't have your conversation on Signal. We see that across a whole host of different parts of the administration. And this is the one where the gravest consequences of basically blowing off the normal way of doing things has caused a problem. But it seems like the potential for this kind of thing is possible all across different sectors of the government.
This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. I really need new pajamas or a new nightgown, just some sleepwear that works better for me than the raggedy tank tops and old pajamas that I've been wearing. So I went on the Saks website and found a whole bunch of lovely things in nice light materials, silk, satin, cotton, all kinds of different two-piece sets that I could imagine happily wearing, lovely bathrobes. There's something really pretty from a designer called Natori that looked really nice, and something else from another designer called Eberjay that I'd never heard of. These are the kinds of things that you can easily find if you go online and shop at Saks. So if you're looking for a fun, effortless shopping experience and want to elevate your personal style, head to Saks. That's Saks.com for everyday inspiration.
Today's episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. NerdWallet's travel journalists break down the pros and cons of travel decisions, like when premium economy is worth it and when you're just paying extra for a slightly bigger armrest, or whether booking direct is cheaper than using third-party sites. I've definitely planned and gone on trips that were much more enjoyable because I had that type of clear, helpful guidance. A couple of years ago, when my girlfriend and I went to Italy, we were trying to figure out how to see the city of Agrigento, a beautiful city in Sicily. And we just had no concept of how to get a good guide. And there was an expert who I talked to who knew a lot about Italy, and he pointed me towards this resource of guides in Agrigento. And we ended up with this magnificent guide, and it made all the difference that day. It was so much fun to see that city with the right guide, and that wouldn't have happened had we just shown up there. So having that extra confidence and a little less stress can make all the difference when you're planning an amazing trip. So before you book, learn how to get the most out of your travel dollars. Follow Smart Travel on your favorite podcast app. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Quince. So I'm about to go on a trip. I'm literally going on a trip this afternoon. And when you're going on a trip, you start to think a lot about what you need to travel well. And there's something that I am so covetous of that Quince has that I can't wait to get for my next trip. And that's a packing cube, compression packing cubes. So my girlfriend has compression packing cubes from Quince. They're amazing. She can fit seemingly like the entire house into a small container. It's just amazing what can go into these things. And I've tried to borrow them, but she doesn't trust me to borrow them because I will probably lose them. And so I have to get my own. And I'm so excited to get these from Quince. And the best part is that all Quince items, like these compression cubes, are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. So for your next trip, treat yourself to the luxe upgrades you deserve from Quince. Go to quince.com/gabfest for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/gabfest to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/gabfest. The Trump administration is waging an extremely effective campaign against America's justice system from all directions at once. We've talked about different aspects of this in recent weeks: the politicization of the Justice Department, the personal targeting of judges, selective prosecutions and pardons. This week brings another kind of deviously brilliant chapter in this, or deviously brilliant front: the intimidation of law firms. The Trump administration is engaged in a very clear campaign to deter law firms from taking on work that they perceive to be critical of them, critical of Trump, or critical of the administration's goals. And it's taken two primary forms. Trump has barred from government work and removed security clearances from several firms that have gotten on his bad side by representing his opponents or hiring people who prosecuted him. That's one thing they've done. Second, Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi said they will use the government's vast power to sanction lawyers who file what they decide are frivolous or vexatious litigation against the government. This is pretty chilling. Not because I, care too much about law firms. Like no one's weeping for law firms or these lawyers who are very well paid for their job. But why, Emily? What is it that is so alarming about this particular form of attack?
Well, one of the ways in which one challenges the government and holds it accountable is by taking it to court. And big law firms, which are the primary targets, are often the engines behind the nonprofits that we hear about bringing these lawsuits. Often what happens is that the big firms come in and help do the enormous amount of work it takes to bring a major lawsuit. They partner. It's part of their pro bono for free practice that they're offering. And another thing is that they represent people who are in trouble, of problems with the government. And if you try to derail all of that work by threatening them as business enterprises, you really change the way law operates as a challenge to the vast powers that the Trump administration is taking for itself. That's why they matter. It is hard to have sympathy for big law, right? I mean, these are really profitable enterprises. People are mostly spending their time making a lot of money. But there is also this role that lawyers play in the system. And until now, every administration has just recognize that our adversarial system demands that lawyers take clients who are unappealing in all kinds of ways, right? The Guantanamo detainees, just every example, you are supposed to still have a right to have a lawyer and hopefully to have a good lawyer. That just has zero purchase in this administration. Trump reduces everything to his friends and his enemies. And so that kind of overriding value is what's really at stake here.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the pattern in autocratic states or states that move towards autocracy is you destroy the independence of the legal system. But that's not a single action. It requires coming at it from all these different directions. And it turns out that this is direction because I'm dumb. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking, oh, they're going to make it hard for big law firms to do their work. And that's going to cripple the ability of nonprofits to file lawsuits. That's going to cripple the ability of anyone to get a defense if they're being charged by the Trump administration in something important. It's going to cripple the ability of lawyers who've ever done any work that Trump considers anathema to get jobs. And that is it's a squid, it's a tentacle that is like tentacles that are just damaging the legal system in all these different directions at once.
Right. I mean, look, one really important thing that separates the United States from countries like Hungary and Russia is the strength of our civil society. We have hundreds of years of this really strong web of organizations and businesses and universities and medical institutions, all these sectors of our society that kind of stand with some amount of independence from the government. And what the Trump folks are doing is threatening all of them, trying to cow them into submission by targeting a few of them, kind of picking them off one by one. It's been Trump's strategy from the very beginning. It's why he's a bully, right? You take one person, you make them the target, and then everybody else has to watch. And what is coming across in this attack on, there are 4 different firms that have been specifically named, is that everybody else is just kind of standing by. And then you have exactly the chilling effect you're talking about. You not only have the targeting of these major law firms, but you have the fact that all these bystanders have not acted. And then you actually have a real, I think, act of capitulation from Paul Weiss, which is this, the biggest firm that Trump went after, decided to cut a deal rather than challenging these obviously, I think, illegal actions in court. Now, we also have this counterexample of Perkins Coie, the first firm Trump went after, which is suing against his order. And so, we'll watch that play out as well. But it's been not very much kind of standing up institutionally. And it's just this giant collective action problem, right? Like everybody individually is better off trying to duck and save their business, which was what Paul Weiss was doing. But then you don't have the kind of response that would actually put the whole thing to an end. I think it could.
And Emily, didn't you also have a situation in which not only did Paul Weiss not see its competitors and colleagues in the business rush to its side, but in fact they felt, and obviously this is in Paul Weiss's interest to say this out loud, but let's take them at their word for the moment, that they felt their competitors not only would not rally to defend them, but that they saw that their competitors saw this as an opportunity to pick up the business and snag the lawyers from Paul Weiss by their competitors if they actually took on the Trump administration.
Yeah, I mean, if that's true, I'd say it's pretty reprehensible. The firms that Paul Weiss accused of trying to take its business then denied it, so it's a little hard to tell. But, the other thing to say here is that it's not like Paul Weiss tested this premise. It is possible that its whole business could have collapsed, but this is a law firm that does $2.6 billion worth of business a year. And so, I think it's fair to ask, okay, if you really think the whole thing is going to crumble, but maybe you should have checked to see if at the margins, you could have taken somewhat of a hit. And I'm relying here, especially on Bob Bauer, who was the White House counsel, one of them for Barack Obama. And I should say, I think is a former partner at Perkins Coie. But, he's been just clearly making the case that there is a way to stand up here that Paul Weiss didn't even try.
Why is it, do you think, Emily, that the law firms and the legal community in general did not find a way to band together or haven't found a way to band together? They do have the bar. They could form a bar. It is the bar. Why is it that they aren't able to do it?
Well, the ABA, the American Bar Association, actually has been putting out some pretty strong statements, so that's worth mentioning. I think there is this collision between the self-interest of the law firms and the desire to kind of protect themselves and maybe benefit in some way, and this larger value. And, frankly, it's the exact same dynamic that we're seeing among the universities. I know we're about to talk about that next, but they also have not made some big collective statement standing behind Columbia and the University of Pennsylvania that have had these big funding cuts threatened. So, in both cases, there's a way in which these really important sectors and which claim to stand for these larger principles are just really failing to live up to that. And that's, another kind of diabolical genius of President Trump. He calls people out, and then in the circumstances in which there's really something at stake, they fold. They are folding currently, a lot of them. Not all of them, but some of them.
And the more fold, the easier it becomes for future people to fold, because it's like, what are you going to do? We're just everybody's undersold everywhere all at once, so the collective action problem kind of gets turned upside down, and you become collectively exculpated because everybody's under this pressure, and what you did is not such a great sin. And it seems to me it has a reinforcing effect for President Trump, who argues these norms and these big principles that you walk around with your high pants talking about, they crumble under the least little test. And so these measurements and these standards by which you say I'm falling short, turns out they're not that big a deal anyway. So your norms and your behaviors in the abstract that you judge me by are not that big a deal either.
And then we also see the way in which the federal government is just such a huge entity that, the universities made decisions after World War II to take all this federal funding. And the law firms, of course, they do a lot of business that involves the government and companies that contract with the government. But then when you have that intermingling, you see the vulnerability once the federal government stops acting in good faith. And that's part of this equation here.
There's a really good piece that I want to commend to everybody in The Atlantic, in Jeff Goldberg's The Atlantic, by Aziz Huq, who's a writer I don't know, but it's
law professor.
It's really law professor. Great. America's watching the rise of a dual state, and casts back to a Jewish writer who had been a lawyer in Nazi Germany in the early days and ultimately had left. Survived and left and wrote a book about the rise of the dual state. And the dual state in this context is that for most people, and this is true in Nazi Germany and for a lot of states, like if you can maintain a basically functioning legal system, property rights are protected, like regular crimes are prosecuted, that's really important. And that Nazi Germany actually was able to do that for most people in Germany. But then there is this tranche of people, and who that is, can be arbitrary, and you can suddenly be stuffed into it at the will of the government whenever they decide. The justice system can become totally arbitrary, capricious, cruel, heartless, taking of property, taking of life, taking of liberty. But most Germans actually never ended up in that world. It was just the disfavored few. Few being millions, but still few compared to the majority of the society. And as long as you can kind of maintain that normality for most people, this cruel and brutal state, authoritarian state, can survive. And he's saying, like, we're witnessing perhaps an early version of that here. And it sure felt like that way to me as I read that story.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up. One wonders in this, what feels like a kind of slide toward autocracy, or a potential slide, like what are the moments going to be where we look back and we really can see the turning points? And it's really hard to tell in real time, but it feels like we are moving in a dangerous, scary direction.
Can I just talk about, this is a more hilarious aside, which is I've now talked to 2 lawyers in the past couple of months who are involved in white collar law, and they're kind of perplexed, but for a totally different reason. So one I talked to was somebody who was an environmental lawyer, by which, in this case, he defended companies that were accused of environmental malpractice, some kind of environmental malfeasance. The other was somebody who did foreign corrupt practices Act, where you defend companies which are accused of manipulating or bribing people in foreign countries. And those are two big forms of white collar law. They just don't have any work because the Trump administration is not putting any pressure on companies to abide by environmental laws, and so there's no environmental defense that companies have to do. So they don't need big white collar lawyers to defend them. And there's the Trump administration has said it's not going to enforce the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So people who help companies with that don't have any work either. So that's another aspect of the attack on law firms, which is perhaps less. It's terrible in a different way. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by SelectQuote. It seems every day there's something new to worry about. While there's a lot that's out of our control, there's one thing you can control: your family's financial future with life insurance through SelectQuote. SelectQuote has been one of America's leading insurance brokers for more than 2 million families since 1985. And their licensed insurance agents can work to tailor a life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. They work with carriers that can get you same-day coverage with no medical exam required. And if you have high blood pressure, diabetes, or heart disease, that is not a problem because SelectQuote partners with carriers that can cover those conditions and others. It's important to protect your family and your health, and life insurance can provide that peace of mind. SelectQuote. They shop, you save. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/Gabfest. Go to selectquote.com/Gabfest today to get started. That's selectquote.com/Gabfest. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Upwork. Hiring shouldn't be a hassle or a drain on your budget. Upwork is your one-stop shop to find, hire, and pay top freelance talent, saving you time and keeping costs in check. Companies at every stage turn to Upwork to get things done and find more flexibility in the way they staff key projects and initiatives. Upwork's global marketplace is filled with top talent in IT, web dev, AI, design, admin support, marketing, and more. And posting a job on Upwork is easy. With no cost to join, you can register, browse freelancer profiles, get help drafting a job post, or even book a consultation. From there, you can connect with freelancers and easily hire them. Upwork makes the entire process simpler and more affordable with industry-low fees. So visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com to post your job for free and connect with top talent ready to help your business grow. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com. As Emily just noted, our second topic and our third topic are basically the same topic. If you consider Trump's project to be the kind of destruction and the castration of elites and systems that he sees restraining him and favoring the left, what he's doing to law and what he is doing to higher education are one and the same, or they are sister projects. The attack on higher education appears to be an absolutely core part of the Trump presidency. It's couched as rooting out woke ideas that are poisoning mind and protecting students from rampaging anti-Semitic protesters. But basically, they're using huge cudgels to get universities to come to heel, to weaken universities, to make them poorer, less important, and cut them off from the spigot of government money. And it's proving to be incredibly effective, it looks like, or at least it's proving to be very scary for universities at the moment. So, John, why do you think it is that the Trump administration has made attacking higher education such a central pillar of its overall project?
In some of these cases, I think that the president himself is not, like, I think he's much more invested in punishing these law firms that worked against him in what he has seen as a series of witch hunts. I think he's personally invested in that in a slightly different way than the universities. The universities represent and give plenty of evidence to the president and the people who support him, the kind of support of what they see as politically correct or woke ideology and so forth. And they don't like that. But I don't think I think he's happy to let loose the people who are really invested in this. I don't think it's as personal an investment as it is with the law firms. I mean, the anti-wokeness is throughout the administration. And so this is just what they see as one of the major locations of it. It doesn't surprise me. And obviously there's the Middle Eastern piece of it that Columbia represents that's a little different than academia more broadly.
Emily, you work at a university, at a big university, one of the biggest and the most, famous universities. Do you sense among your colleagues or in the university itself a kind of fear about what is happening there?
Yeah, I mean, people are having their grants cut, and it feels like it could be a really significant fraction of the whole in a way that would shrink the university. And I think lots of major research universities are feeling this. Economically and financially, the picture of a lot of universities is that they are kind of small centers of learning attached to a giant research and medical operation. And so when you take away some of those funds, that really changes the nature of the enterprise. The threat is real. I think this question of how to respond is, the really crucial one. And watching Columbia decide to do things that, maybe the university wanted to do some of those things anyway, but to do it in response to the federal government, to take an independent academic department and essentially put it under the control of some to be named senior vice provost or whatever the title was, that is very chilling. That is not the way academic freedom is supposed to work. And for people who are on the faculty, for students at these institutions, it's really alarming to see those kinds of moves. That's just antithetical to the basic premise of the school. And again, Trump is forcing the schools into this position, but then they're doing it.
The spigots of government money are mostly fueling science, the core science and biomedical research that is the envy of the world. So this is one of these things where you can punish the universities and the elites, but at a huge, at least I certainly believe, at a huge cost to the future of the country and to the economy. And so while I think it is bad and antithetical to free thought to have the federal government, telling universities who should run Middle Eastern studies departments or telling universities they have to teach intelligent design, that's not good. But I think it would be a genuine disaster to lose the whole infrastructure of research at American universities, which is what they're risking.
And the reason is because research should be done without the profit motive to discover things that you might not discover if you left all the research to be done by drug companies, right? I mean, that's the argument for doing it at universities.
Right.
Yeah, and the partnership between the universities and NIH, the National Institutes of Health, has been incredibly beneficial to the country, to the world, in all these ways that we see around us in terms of scientific discovery, for sure. And yet, the political cost of attacking, higher ed, especially if you can make it seem like you're just attacking elite higher ed, it's just not very high. It just seems like these are a bunch of prima donnas flouncing around some of the time, especially at schools, including Yale, that have really big endowments. And so there's a way in which the inequalities and the sort of weird distortions of the whole system are playing to the benefit of the Trump administration, and also the costs of the research cuts, the things that we're not going to discover, et cetera, those are medium to long-term costs, and they're kind of interact. And so, the Trump administration is just totally willing to roll the dice on it because the immediate politics of it are not necessarily unfavorable or not unfavorable enough.
And they benefit from some internal disappointment with the closing of the American mind that's taken place on some of these campuses. The statistic at Harvard that only 33% of the graduates felt like they could express their minds about a controversial subject. I mean, it's not like the universities have been perfectly blameless. And so you have a weakness from within the academy of people saying, maybe we have gone too far in the way in which we police speech and the way we've created something opposite to or antithetical to our free inquiry that's supposed to be our guiding principle.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. And also you have a kind of alienation of conservatives from these institutions, right? When you look at the number of faculty members who vote Republican or even in the student body, it's low. And so it doesn't feel like these institutions kind of belong to a bipartisan collective in the way that, maybe they used to, maybe that's a little romanticized. And then you have this kind of problem. Like, is that because the universities have kind of narrowed down ideologically? In some departments, yes, but there also is this question about, truth telling and fact finding and the way in which the right has in a lot of ways moved away from that. I don't want to absolve the left. It absolutely has its blind spots, but I think there's some real tensions there.
I really, we talked earlier about how getting to see the internal debates of the Houthi PC small group is interesting to hear them talk about what they're trying to accomplish by bombing the Houthis in Yemen. I would love to hear the internal discussions about what they think there is going to happen to the American economy and to American research with what they're doing. Because they cannot possibly be so stupid as to think, oh, it won't have any effect, or these people don't matter. All these physicists and basic research guys, they're just wasting money, with their test tubes and their super colliders. What stupidity! They can't be that dumb. I mean, they must understand. These are people. J.D. Vance went to Yale Law School. Donald Trump went to Penn. All of the people who are in these leadership positions in the university are elites. Donald Trump saying he wants more air traffic controllers who went to MIT. I mean, they understand how valuable this stuff is, and yet they don't express it. They never express the value in it. Elon Musk, an engineer who believes really strongly in the value of engineering, although not, I guess, in the value of higher education, which he's slagged many, many times. Do you think there's going to be any spillover from this into the other forms of higher education that conservatives are less upset by, namely community colleges and the more trade education that a lot of Americans get, which is extremely valuable? Because if you cut student loan programs and if you generally defund money for higher education, the places that are training people to become nurses, the places that are training people to do technical work and skilled manufacturing, those are also going to suffer a huge amount as well.
I mean, yes. And one would hope that when it starts to be kind of widely disseminated like that there is the kind of political response and pushback and resistance that there needs to be in order to stop this. And again, that's another reason why a broad sense of collective action is really important. And yet, so far, I just don't really see it.
It seems like the energy for that is going to have to come from, as it has for the last many years, from corporations that say we just don't have a workforce for our future that we need. And so you have to find a way to do this through education to provide us with the kind of workers we need. We can't fund all of that ourselves. But I don't know how that message gets conveyed and in what channels it does.
Emily, can we close on this? You were hinting earlier that, there hasn't been kind of a collective action by universities. Universities have not stood up to tell the world why they are valuable and make the case for themselves, because they are also in a crouch. They're hoping Trump doesn't notice their university, doesn't go after their endowment. What would they say, and who would say it?
Well, Chris Eisengruber, who's the president of Princeton, wrote a really good piece in The Atlantic in which he exactly made this case. Michael Roth, who's the president of Wesleyan, has been doing it kind of consistently for years, I think. And the case is, I think, a kind of better, streamlined version of what we've been talking about, that these schools, that the science they're doing and the humanities, that this is the kind of learning that advances human civilization. It's how we build a skilled workforce. It's this huge advantage that the United States has had. It's why people want to come here and study and learn and either go home or stay. And that kind of crown jewel is incredibly worthwhile. There are problems with it. It's not operating in a way that, enhances and improves equality across the society as much as it should be. But again, it's like everything that Trump does, there is a kernel of truth in the critique, and then the remedy is just wildly out of sync with what actually needs to happen to make things better.
Let's go to cocktail chatter. John Dickerson, when you're not having an alcoholic beverage, because when you're sick, you should not drink. But when you're having a nourishing bowl of broth with Mrs. Dickerson, what are you going to be hacking to her?
Yeah. Well, the total Wall Street bonus haul figure came out from the New York State Comptroller, and it hit a record. There were $47.5 billion in bonuses from Wall Street. That's an average bonus of $244,000, up nearly 32% from 2023. And I guess what interests me about this is that I was also struck that New York Stock Exchange members saw their profits soar 90% last year. So why does this matter? Well, it's just the continued, rise of the market and the success of the people associated with it. But we are in the middle of a massive experiment by the presidency, which is that he's going to rewire the economy, and they've all accepted there will be short-term pain, maybe even a recession, and it is all for the purposes of what? So the what, according to the Treasury Secretary, is that like the people who've been getting a raw deal in the real economy life is going to be better for them. And so he says that they say the market, which has responded unfavorably at times to what President Trump has been doing, isn't the real economy. I don't know. I'm not sure. And I think that you see that the reconfiguration about the markets that was supposed to take place after the Great Recession from 2007 to 2009 never took place. And so I'm really curious about what the replacement economy the Trump team seems to think it's going to take America to, how it really exists in a world where people are doing very well, making 90% profits and bonuses. And I think the powers of those people who would like to continue succeeding in the way they are just going to be too powerful to overtake whatever it is the Trump administration thinks it's doing, leaving aside the question of whether the Trump administration can be successful in completely overhauling the American economy.
Emily Bazelon, what is your cocktail chatter?
I just had an amazing trip abroad to Rwanda, a country I had never visited. I'm lucky enough to have friends who go there a lot and were incredibly helpful in making this trip happen and making it super meaningful. And, I was thinking, like, what of all the amazing things I got to see and do to talk about? And what I'm going to carry with me is how hard people were working in this country. There tends to be like one main road that goes through all these different villages and communities. And so you see people going about their daily business as you're going off places. And I'm talking about getting outside of Kigali, the capital of Rwanda. And people are just like walking, carrying stuff, riding bikes up hills with enormous loads of potatoes or like lumber they're carrying, working their fields by hand most of the time. And I just got this feeling of like incredible industriousness. Some of it was a little baffling, like why it wasn't more mechanized and a little more industrialized in a way that I think like would make people's lives easier and better. But Rwanda is a pretty lush climate. And so there was just a ton of farming going on. We went to a couple of markets out in the countryside where people were just like selling, it was like a whole sea of cabbage being sold and these amazing fabrics that are really colorful that people make and sell. So anyway, really great country to visit. Thank you, everybody who was so nice to us.
My chatter is about a story I read in the Washington Post. 2 killer whales are hunting great white sharks to eat their livers. And it's about how just a single pair of killer whales off the coast of South Africa, off the coast of Cape Town in South Africa, have basically remade an entire ecosystem. They're 2 orcas known as Port and Starboard, and they just have gone after every great white shark that they could find, not really to do anything except to eat the liver, just the liver. Now, the liver, to be fair, is a huge percentage of shark, like something like as much as a third of a shark is its liver. But they don't bother with anything else. They just make very precise cuts in the shark, extract the liver, and just leave the rest to float to the bottom of the ocean. And it's really gruesome. Hannibal Lecter was invoked, and what has happened is that the great whites sharks have fled from this part of South Africa. And that has had a cascading effect in the food chain because the things that great whites eat, which include seals, those populations have spiked. And it just all because of these two particular whales that have a real taste for great white shark liver. It's really a gruesome story. Listeners, thanks for chattering. Thanks for sending us your chatter. Email them to us at gabfest@slate.com, what you are talking about at your cocktail party. If there's a great white shark that has been eaten in your neighborhood, find out who did it and chatter about it. Tell us about it. And our chatter this week comes from Alex, who's a neighbor of Emily in West Hartford, Connecticut.
My chatter is inspired by John's chatter a few weeks ago about Ollie, the first cow to take flight back in 1930. If you're interested in learning about more of the random activities Americans were engaged in the 1930s, I'd recommend the book Since Yesterday, written by Frederick Lewis Allen in 1939. One passage that stuck with me is when Allen writes about the, quote, utterly fantastic epidemic of tree sitting. He writes that this impelled thousands of publicity-crazy boys to roost in trees by day and night in the hope of capturing a record, with occasional misadventures. A boy in Fort Worth fell asleep, hit the ground, and broke 2 ribs. The owner of a tree at Niagara Falls sued to have a boy removed from its branches, whereupon the boy's friends cut a branch from another tree, carried him to a new perch, and enabled him to continue his vigil. And a boy in Manchester, New Hampshire, stayed aloft till a bolt of lightning knocked him down. So this just goes to show that kids were doing bizarre and dangerous viral trends many generations before the invention of Tide Pods and TikTok.
If you want to hear more from Slate Podcasts, I got a good episode for you to check out. What Next TBD made their own meme coin. So I'm really curious about this because I keep hearing about meme coins and they seem super sketchy and super confusing and a way to scam people. And I'm very curious about what happened when they made it. So you can hear all about what goes into making a meme coin, the shady promoters they had to navigate to do it, and learn whether or not their brainworm meme coin actually made any money. Ooh, I'm very curious to find out whether it made any money. That is all for our episode this week. We also have a bonus episode in your feed. We're going to talk to one of the most interesting Democratic politicians around, Michigan State Senator Mallory McMorrow, who has a new book out. That, however, is only for Slate Plus members who also get lots of other great stuff for their subscription. Discounts to live shows, bonus episodes on other Slate podcasts, never hitting the paywall on the Slate site, much more. So if you are a member, thank you. Enjoy our talk with Mallory McMorrow. If you're not a member, you can subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. That's our show for today. Our researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. For John Dickerson, and yes, Emily Bazelon, she is back better than ever. I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.